5 police officers ambushed and killed in Dallas.
We got a guy with a long rifle. We don't know where the hell he's at.
A dramatic standoff ends with police bombing a suspect. Lawmakers share their heartbreak and frustration.
An attack on the people who protect us is an attack on all of us.
We're one people, we're one family, we're one house.
Why members of the Congressional Black Caucus called this week's violence a national crisis. And one bishop makes a plea for peace. See his message of mercy. And reaction to the Vatileaks verdict on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 8th, 2016.
But it just, I could hear so much gunshots going off all around me. I didn't know really what to do besides, survive.
A witness describes the terror after a gunman opens fire on police in Dallas, the deadliest attack on officers since 9/11. It's a somber day in America. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We have team coverage of the Dallas police ambush. Jason Calvi will have reaction from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. First, Wyatt Goolsby brings us the latest on the investigation.
Lauren, Dallas Police Chief David Brown says the ambush attack killed 5 officers and wounded 7 others. They were monitoring a protest in downtown Dallas over the deaths of 2 black men killed by police in Louisiana and Minnesota. What started out as a peaceful protest quickly turned into panic. The shots began late Thursday night, just before 9. Police originally thought it was a coordinated attack from multiple shooters, but now authorities are investigating whether the gunman, seen here in this cell phone video, acted alone.
It was a rifle or a shotgun or a sniper rifle. I couldn't really tell because I was so scared. Man, I just never thought something like this would actually happen.
Dallas police have identified 25-year-old Micah Xavier Johnson as the man who opened fire. The Army says Johnson was a reservist who served 1 tour of duty in Afghanistan 2 years ago. Johnson told a hostage negotiator he was upset about the recent police shootings of 2 black men and wanted to kill white people. The 911 audio reveals a chaotic scene.
Hey, slow down! He's in the damn building right there! Don't know where he's at!
Brown says Johnson was killed by a robot-delivered bomb in a parking lot after hours of negotiations failed. One of the officers killed is Dallas Transit officer Brent Thompson. Chief Brown says he was married within the past 2 weeks.
We're hurting. Our profession is hurting. Dallas officers are hurting.
Protesters in major cities have been calling for change following this week's police shootings. The deputy police chief in Dallas told CNN the rift between police and community is now too big to be ignored.
We can't divide ourselves. The community needs the police, and the police need the community. We are one and the same. We have a 50-50 partnership, and we have to sit at the table to see what is the best way forward.
Earlier today, dozens of officers filled the corridor of the emergency room at Baylor Medical Center where the wounded officers were taken. Chief Brown says most of the injured officers have been released tonight, but some of them will need follow-up treatment. Lauren.
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. President Barack Obama says there's no possible justification for the police ambush. He asks all Americans to pray for the fallen officers and their families.
I believe that I speak for every single American when I say that we are horrified over these events and that we stand united with the people and the police department in Dallas.
The president spoke from a NATO summit in Poland. He ordered flags lowered to half staff. We turn now to the U.S. Capitol, where Speaker Ryan is calling on the heavily divided Congress to come together. Others are calling for change. Jason Calvi continues our team coverage.
Bless those as well charged with protecting and serving our country.
Lawmakers began an emotional day on Capitol Hill with prayer.
We need legislative action now.
As members of the Congressional Black Caucus demand universal background checks and a ban on assault weapons.
These cops that were killed with these military-style weapons, and it's just frustrating, I guess. It's just tears of frustration.
But if this Congress does not have the guts to lead, then we are responsible for all the bloodshed on the streets of America.
Some Americans are blaming the Black Lives Matter protesters. But the head of the Black Caucus says they're not responsible.
This shooting in Dallas was an isolated incident. It was not part of the protest. This was just a deranged person, a murderer, who got his hands on a weapon unnecessarily and murdered these police officers.
Republican Trent Franks sees it differently.
I believe this president's rhetoric has deliberately, for political reasons, inflamed racial tensions in this country. And I believe that unfortunately some of the tragedies that are happening out there will be someday laid at his feet.
But Speaker Paul Ryan says the country shouldn't allow anger to deepen division.
The blame lies with the people who committed these vicious acts and no one else. And as the president rightfully said, justice will be done.
House leaders from both parties say they will work together on a common response, but we don't have many details about what that will be. We do know that tomorrow House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy and Democrat Steny Hoyer will talk, and then some bipartisan response, Lauren, could be announced next week.
Thank you, Jason. The presidential candidates have canceled campaign events today. Hillary Clinton would have held a rally with Vice President Joe Biden in Pennsylvania, and Donald Trump had planned to talk to Hispanics in Miami. Catholic bishops respond to this week's violence. Bishop Robert Munch served the people of Baton Rouge, where a police shooting death sparked protests earlier this week.
Our Lord invites us to renew our trust in his promise of fidelity, to increase our prayer, and to renew our commitment to peace and mercy toward one another.
Bishop Munch says we are all called to be ministers of healing to a hurting world. Twin Cities Archbishop Bernard Hebda says we need to come together as God's family to pray that God's grace might unite all people of goodwill and bring light into the darkness of this difficult time. He dedicated a mass for the preservation of peace and justice following this week's police death in Minneapolis. We're learning more about the two shootings that sparked protests this week. Alton Sterling died after he was shot by two police officers in Baton Rouge. A homeless man reportedly called 911, claiming Sterling threatened him with a gun after he asked him for money. Investigators told CNN they found a gun on Sterling's body.
If you don't care, there's something wrong with you. If you're getting desensitized to seeing this so many times, there's something wrong.
A Minnesota prosecutor calls for a prompt and thorough investigation of the police shooting that killed Philando Castile. Police refused to say what led to the traffic stop or why the officer drew his gun. Castile's girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter watched it happen.
I don't want to keep reliving this moment.
Absolutely.
I want my justice.
The Justice Department is investigating the Baton Rouge shooting and says it will monitor Minnesota's investigation. And our panel now, Christine Emba edits the Washington Post's In Theory blog, and Craig Floyd is founding president and chief executive officer of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. Thank you both for joining us on this very sad day.
Thank you.
Let's start with you. You have been burying police officers since the center opened in 1984. Your thoughts today?
Takes a toll on you. 20,789 names now inscribed on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. Over the last decade, we've averaged 144 line-of-duty police deaths each and every year. And 5 in one incident is the most we've had since 9/11. It was tough on me, tough on the entire law enforcement community, and it should be tough on every law-abiding citizen in this nation, because an attack on police officers is an attack on all of us.
And that's exactly what we saw Paul Ryan say. Christine, the reason we wanted you to be sitting here today is we read a very moving op-ed that you wrote today in the Washington Post. And we're going to show just the picture. But you said in here, but last night I dreamed about my brother's death, because I know that for all of his achievements, 2 Ivy League degrees and not even a hint of a criminal record, at night, he's just another black man driving, and he could be killed like one too. That's very powerful. I got goosebumps when I read that. What did you mean? Is this an attack on police officers?
My article is certainly not an attack on police officers. And I honestly don't think that any of the movements or the protests that we've seen following these events are attacks on police officers at all either. I think that we can all acknowledge that police officers, when they're doing their jobs, which is, I think, almost all of the time, serve us and keep us safe. We should respect that and we should be thankful for that. At the same time, it's still possible to have many great police officers and some that aren't so great. And unfortunately, the black community is disproportionately affected by those police officers who unfortunately commit violent acts.
Do you agree with that?
I think if you look at the statistics, you'll find that there's fewer than 6,000 complaints of misconduct filed against law enforcement officers in this country each year. That sounds like a big number, I'm sure, to a lot of people. But when you overlay that against the 900,000 sworn officers serving in the United States, more than 99% of the officers serving today do not have complaints of misconduct filed against them. They're doing their jobs properly and professionally. And I certainly agree with Christine that every once in a while you're going to have a bad apple in the barrel, as any profession does. But I would suggest more than 99% of the profession doing their jobs properly and professionally is a pretty good statistic that we should be pretty proud of.
What we keep hearing on the news is this is now, today, a national crisis, as if it wasn't before today. We are three very reasonable people. What is the solution to these protests and the killings on both sides? Why don't you start?
Well, I think clearly we've lost some of the trust that needs to exist for safe communities to continue in America. The police cannot do their jobs alone effectively and safely without the cooperation and the support and the trust of the citizens they serve. So yes, we have to restore that trust. One way we're doing it is police officers are now wearing body cameras more and more across this country.
We've seen that in lots of the videos.
We're going to see video footage that I think in most cases is going to exonerate the officers and prove that they're doing their jobs right.
Christine, do you believe that there's a lack of trust?
Yes, unfortunately, I think that there is. And I think, as you're saying, actually, that body cams, that dash cams, all of these are great innovations that I think citizens will find reassuring, that police officers will find reassuring. But we also have to think of the instances in which we haven't had those and things have been worse. I think one of the things that was remarkable and frustrating about these shootings this week is that without film by bystanders, which not filmed by police officers, not filmed from police officers' body cams. In fact, in the second shooting of Philando Castile, both the officers said that their body cams had come off. We wouldn't have even known that this had happened. This would have happened and it would have remained silent. And I think the Black community is a little bit tired and frustrated by the fact that if we don't speak out, if we don't happen to be filming, it seems almost as if nobody notices or nobody cares that this is happening.
We are going to have to leave it there. I think we could have this discussion for the next 20 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. Christine Emba, you can read her article today about her brother in the Washington Post. President and CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, Craig Floyd. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks for having us.
Coming up, religious objections, a growing push on Capitol Hill to protect people of faith. And the National Right to Life Convention is underway. What grassroots activists are learning. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. 10 states, including Ohio, Kansas, and Michigan, are suing the federal government over transgender rules. They require public schools to allow transgender students to use restrooms and locker rooms conforming to their self-proclaimed gender identity. Money could be withheld from public schools that refuse to comply with the federal directive. In May, 11 other states sued over the same directive. The governor of Mississippi is asking an appeals court to let a law protecting religious freedom take effect in the state. It would let some businesses and government employees cite religious beliefs when it comes to providing services for same-sex couples. A lower federal court has blocked the Mississippi law. And conscience rights took center stage on Capitol Hill today, where health professionals pushed for protection against laws that would force them to perform or pay for abortions.
We are not in the business of destroying life as physicians, nurses, healthcare professionals. We value the dignity of human life because all human life comes from God.
Representative Joe Pitts led today's forum on protecting conscious rights. He cited several government mandates like a California law which requires abortion as a basic health care service. Many groups say they may be forced out of business if they are not protected. The House will vote on a bill that could protect groups against abortion mandates next week. And this week, the National Right to Life Convention is in Virginia. It features activists, lawmakers, and business executives. Catholic theologian Dr. Angela Franks is the author of Contraception and Catholicism, What the Church Teaches and Why. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So nice to have you live. I know that you live in Boston. You're a professor at St. John's Seminary.
Correct.
You're here for the National Right to Life Convention in Virginia. Tell me, what's the goal of that convention?
The convention tries to educate the activist, and so all of the latest information on what's happening legislatively, judicially, bioethically, scientifically, all of that is there to prepare the activists so then we can go back to our home and make a difference.
And so it's science, talking to them about the latest information, the latest statistics. What do you think the status of the pro-life movement is today? When you look at the bills being proposed and the Supreme Court striking down the clinic bill, as it just did in Texas, it seems to me that it's discouraging.
There's certainly a lot to be discouraged about. There's no doubt about it. I mean, my area of focus is Planned Parenthood, and anytime you think about Planned Parenthood, you immediately get depressed in my mind. But I think it's important to realize there's a lot of hope because abortion numbers have not been increasing the way that they were before. They've been holding steady or going down. I think that there is more public opinion. People are much more likely to identify as pro-life. A majority identified as pro-life for the first time as of a few years ago. And so I think that people don't like abortion, and that's because of the pro-life movement really continuing to be vibrant. And
you also wrote this book, Contraception, right here, and Catholicism. And you say in this that the contraception, I was taking a look at it here, is that many people's lives are better without contraception. What do you mean by that?
Contraception has really sold this lie that it's going to be easy and pain-free to separate sexual activity from reproduction. Because when sex is now separated from reproduction, a man can come and say, well, I just signed up for the sexual relationship side of things, not the baby side, right?
I know. What do you say, though, to all of the people who say, with contraception, the abortion numbers are down?
That's the argument. And in fact, though, there's no evidence to prove that contraception has lowered the abortion numbers. Other things like pro-life legislation have lowered the abortion numbers. In fact, what we know is that when adolescents contracept, they are actually more likely to have abortions.
Okay, Catholic theologian Dr. Angela Franks, author of Contraception and Catholicism, What the Church Teaches and Why. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The violence this week in America is not just limited to the high-profile cases making headlines. Chicago streets were flooded with police last weekend after 3 people were killed and dozens injured from gunfire. Catherine Szeltner talks by Skype with one Chicago group striving to curb violence through education.
Erin Aldrich directs the Metro Achievement Center for Girls at the Midtown Educational Foundation in Chicago. Erin, tell us about the girls you mentor. Do they experience any of the violence in the news?
Yeah, we have the students at Midtown and Metro are boys and girls from all over the city of Chicago. So we serve about 600 students in the summer, and they're coming from some of the very deadly neighborhoods. But even in those very deadly neighborhoods, there are safe pockets. And so I would say very regularly, we work with students who have family members and friends who have suffered because of gang violence.
Your program has been going on for about 50 years now. Are you seeing any progress?
Great, yes. We've noticed at Midtown and Metro that progress takes a long time, and it takes sort of the entire city working together to help create a safe environment for students and families throughout Chicago. The way that we do it is we work on really teaching the kids virtues and character and giving them a mentor who's going to help them apply those things in their schools, in their family, in their friendship, learning how to forgive, learning how to work hard. And we recently were just talking with a bunch of our alumni who were stating, you know, it's hard to say how Midtown and Metro have changed our lives because they've really shaped it. We weren't even given the opportunity to go down the wrong path because we always had somebody helping us to stay on the right path.
Erin, finally, if you had to offer one piece of advice to motivate and encourage kids in the inner city, what would that advice be?
I would say find somebody that you look up to and want to be, somebody who is peaceful and positive, and ask them to mentor you through the rest of your life.
Erin Aldrich from the Midtown Educational Foundation, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Up next, more reaction to the Vatileaks trial. 2 journalists speak out after being cleared by the Vatican. The British ambassador to the Holy See tells us about the role of religion in diplomacy. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. 2 Italian journalists not being prosecuted by the Vatican for publishing confidential information praised the verdict. They said the trial never should have happened in the first place and that it put a chill on covering the Vatican.
Una assoluta grande, grandissima
One
gioia.
said the verdict brought him great joy. The decision has some Vatican watchers asking, why did the Vatican put them on trial in the first place? Earlier today, we asked Rome correspondent Ed Pentin.
It's a question many are asking, Lauren, and I think it comes down to a law that was implemented by the Vatican soon after the first Vatileaks scandal, which really prohibited and made it a criminal offence to leak confidential documents to the press. And I think this trial has really been aimed at setting an example and a warning to Vatican officials not to do that. So some say it was perhaps too excessive. I think the trial of the journalists was considered to be that. And I think there was great concern among the world's media that it was limiting press freedom. But why was it called? I think the answer is simply that it's a warning not to leak documents. And I think that's a precedent going forward. Back to you in DC.
Britain's ambassador to the Holy See is getting ready to wrap up his tour in Rome. Nigel Baker has spent 5 years there representing the UK. Rome producer Mary Shovlain sat down with him recently to discuss the role of religion in diplomacy.
Religion is part of the DNA of this position. It's at the fore of all that you're doing here. After spending 5 years working with the Holy See, how would you say religion, what role does religion have on the world stage?
I'm a great advocate of diplomats having a better understanding of the dynamics of religion in the world. I think it's something that we can do more of as the British government. I notice, looking at reports coming from around our network, be it from Latin America, Africa, Asia, Middle East and Europe, that religion is always there. And increasingly there in terms of a motive force for people, as something that makes people get up in the morning and act, as something that, for good and sometimes for ill, is impacting on conflict, or even on economic developments, on the way people look at things like climate change, for example, that sort of custodianship of the planet. So for a diplomat from a secular country like as the United Kingdom, that's a challenge. We don't necessarily understand that as well as we should, so I think we need to work harder to do it. The World Humanitarian Summit recently had a whole session on faith and international development. Again, our development people, in order to understand those dynamics, need to have some understanding of the backgrounds.
I think there was work for so long trying to separate church and state and keep the things separate, but now I think church and state see how they need each other and are finding that way forward.
I often say, understanding faith or the dynamics of religion, you don't have to be religious to do that. I have there are some skeptical colleagues in my own department who will say, well, hang on, but I may be an atheist or a non-believer, and I say, well, that's fine. I'm not telling you that you have to think religion is good, but you do have to recognize that religion is important, and increasingly so, in our milieu, the world of international relations. And at that point, they say, okay, yeah, that I get, and that I can deal with.
We wish you and your family all the best, and all the best in your new position as you head back home. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
That does it for us. For the EW News Nightly Team, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Good night and God bless.